All right, time for your business news. We've got our business editor, Devin Murugan, standing by. Devin, so we heard the State of the Nation address, and now it's time for us to prepare for the budget by the Finance Minister. But everyone just wants to know if there'll be reprieve for consumers, because life is tough.
I know, absolutely. I mean, one of two things. The question's been asked before any budget. Is it a case of consumers going ahead and making sure that the state coffers are less strained, in other words, pay more taxes, or would there be some sort of relief? Well, in his State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing that tax incentives will be given to small businesses and individuals for investing in solar panels. That's the big topic with the electricity crisis at the moment. National Treasury is working on adjustments to the bounce back loan scheme to help small businesses invest in solar power. But how will this likely work out? And can it make any sort of a difference in terms of affordability for an average household? I want to bring in CEO of the Solar Group, Don Wills. It's a private provider of renewable energy solutions. Dom, thanks very much indeed for your time. I mean, this is probably the most anticipated budget aspect at this time, just given the fact that there are dreadful power cuts at the moment. This rebate on the solar power installations, I mean, could it really make it reachable for people to get in touch with solar and affordable? What do you make of it as we approach the budget next week?
Yeah, so I think, of all the measures that the President mentioned during the SONA, this is probably the newest one. The head of SARS was also speaking about it during that week. So I think we can definitely expect something to come through in the budget speech. Most of the other things that have been mentioned in terms of doing things involves the government to do a lot. So changing policy, putting together sort of loan facilities. These are things that can take time. Whereas a tax rebate has been used all over the world. And probably the most important thing about the tax rebate is that it's got very, very minimal state intervention, but can have quite widely felt, sort of impacts. If you were on the fence about doing it, or you thought it was just a little bit too expensive, suddenly a rebate that gives you 10, 20, 30% off the capital cost could suddenly just allow a whole of systems to kind of start moving forward. And this is the kind of incentive that, especially at residential level, and especially at sort of small commercial buildings level, could make a difference on scale. To give you some sense of the scale, we need around 5 gigawatts of rooftop solar to make a big difference. And, China did about 55 gigs in last year alone. So, it's definitely possible. Again, they have 1 billion people, that helps. But it's definitely possible to make a big dent in that. But there are state incentives and subsidies and tax rebates that are required in order to do that. And this is a very welcome step.
I mean, it's interesting you spoke about other countries. What are the scenarios in places like Vietnam and China where the government has stepped in? And I'm wondering whether the finance minister could step in with similar moves to those countries. What's your take?
So in a lot of those countries, the tax incentives have been in place for a while. And then what they add on top of that is something called a feed-in tariff, which this government's never entertained. But that is something where if you put solar on your roof, they'll guarantee that you'll be paid for the energy for a certain period of time. It could be 10 years, could be 20. And that's another very attractive thing to do. Obviously, the government has to pay for the electricity and the consumers ultimately have to pay. But because of Eskom's rising tariffs and because they are, by April next year, they'll be 33% higher than what they are now. So even paying people, reasonably good tariff for the electricity that they're providing by putting solar on their roof, even that would be very effective and actually probably quite profitable for the government. But that is one extra step that our government hasn't spoken about yet, and I think would be a very positive step forward.
And of course, the policy has to be stamped, because it leads into my next question. What sort of timelines do you anticipate here? I mean, if all goes to plans, could we see a home who can afford it attach solar panels en masse this year? But I would imagine that really depends on where the government goes after the budget on getting that policy in place and getting it stamped.
I think it would. I think it would, and it would also depend. I mean, I think there's lots of people that have invested already that would look retroactively or retrospectively to see if they could get a rebate. And once that starts happening and gaining momentum, people start speaking about it and saying, do you know that you could save 30% in your capital costs now? And we don't know when that rebate might go away. That could really cause a kind of a mini stampede. And you get a lot of buy-in. I mean, solar panels are made on a scale of 1.5 million a day in the East. So there's no shortage of panels. There's no shortage of equipment. You can get it here. There's containers, shipping lines, everything. So it's really about execution, and it's also about creating a kind of a window for people so that there's almost like a deadline by which you want to do one of these systems. You know, if they create a deadline on that tax window, I mean, they can always extend it. But if they say, look, we've got 1 year, well, we'll get a 20% or 30% rebate, I think you'll see the market move quite quickly.
Dominez, I'll let you go. Just finally, I mean, we've been looking at this question of affordability just for a typical household. And let's assume you just want to keep the lights on, you want to get your TV and Wi-Fi going. Just typically, what is the cost of that? And as I said, we asked these questions over the past few months. Those costs are changing just on sheer scale and volume of these things coming up. And then you say if these incentives do come in place, perhaps 30% off the overall price given the incentive. What does that look like for a typical household who just want those things on?
Well, I think that's a great question, you know, because it's actually quite low. That the things that are most essential, you know, are not heating devices and cooling devices. They are electronics. You know, even to keep a television on is very minimal. So from a cost perspective, you know, even for 20,000 Rand, you can provide quite a significant amount of power, you know, for 4 hours, which at the moment is our maximum load shedding window. And you know, so obviously that's not nothing. And if you add solar and you know to that, the costs sort of rise up. And I think you know that's possibly where the kind of loan structure that the government is looking at as well could be quite effective. You know, depending on how it rolls out. But if you are looking for something a bit more expensive, or you're kind of looking at a sort of biggish investment, then the loan thing can really help because solar is expensive because you're buying 20 years of energy up front. So the loan structure works really well there. And then for the CapEx sort of model where people are spending out of their own pocket, yeah, then you've essentially got your 20 or 30% rebate, which I think, you know, would probably push quite a lot of people over the line, particularly after we've had consistent load shedding for the last 8 months.
All right, so we look forward to what's going to be said by the Finance Minister on Thursday. That's when the national budget kicks off. Dom Wills, Group CEO of Solar, thanks very much indeed for your time.